friends, history enthusiasts, and all those who seek to understand the profound impact of World War II. Welcome back to the channel. Today, we delve into a stark and harrowing chapter of that global conflict, a story that intertwines the monumental Allied landings in Normandy with a brutal act of reprisal that unfolded in the heart of France. We'll explore the context of D-Day's hope and liberation, juxtaposed with the chilling reality of Nazi occupation and the devastating consequences of resistance. Prepare yourselves for a narrative that encompasses both the grand sweep of history and the intensely personal tragedies of war. The date was June 6, 1944. Under the codename Operation Overlord, the long-awaited Allied invasion of Western Europe commenced. American, British, and Canadian forces, a seemingly endless tide of humanity and machinery, crossed the treacherous English Channel and began their landings on the beaches of Normandy, France. This operation, forever etched in history as D-Day, remains the largest amphibious invasion ever undertaken, deploying over 160,000 Allied troops across air, land, and sea in a single momentous day. It was a beacon of hope for a continent languishing under Nazi occupation, a decisive step towards liberation. Following the initial success of the Normandy landings, the French resistance movement, which had been operating in the shadows for years, intensified its efforts. These brave men and women, often ordinary citizens thrust into extraordinary circumstances, sought to disrupt German communications, sabotage supply lines, and generally make life as difficult as possible for the occupying forces. Their actions, though vital to the Allied cause, came at a tremendous risk. German military commanders, particularly those who had endured the brutal and relentless anti-partisan warfare on the Eastern Front, viewed any form of resistance with extreme prejudice. Having witnessed and participated in the horrific cycle of violence against Soviet partisans and civilian populations, their response to real and even perceived resistance activity in France became increasingly radicalized and utterly ruthless. They saw no distinction between combatants and civilians, and collective punishment became a terrifyingly common tactic. One such brutal response unfolded in the unassuming town of Tulle, nestled in the Curies department of central France. On June 9, 1944, just 3 days after the Allied landings, French resistance fighters, emboldened by the news from Normandy, launched an attack on the German garrison stationed in Tulle. This act of defiance, though strategically significant in disrupting local German control, would trigger a swift and merciless reprisal by the notorious 2nd SS Panzer Division Das Reich. The Das Reich division was no ordinary Wehrmacht unit. It was an elite formation within the Waffen-SS, the military branch of the Nazi Party's paramilitary organization. Having spent 3 long and brutal years on the Eastern Front, fighting against the Soviet Red Army and engaging in horrific anti-partisan operations, the division had earned a chilling reputation for its extreme ruthlessness and disregard for civilian life. Their tactics in the East had included massacres of entire villages, mass deportations of populations, and scorched-earth policies designed to deny any support to the partisans. By early 1944, after suffering heavy losses in the relentless fighting on the Eastern Front, the Das Reich Division was transferred to France to regroup and refit. Under the command of General Heinz Bernhard Lammerding, they established their headquarters in the Montauban region. Their time in France was not solely focused on rest and recuperation. They integrated new recruits, many from diverse and sometimes questionable backgrounds, subjecting them to a rigorous regime of strict military discipline and intense Nazi indoctrination. Between May and July 1944, even before D-Day, the men of Das Reich conducted numerous expeditions across southwestern and central western France, their primary objective being the elimination of the growing threat posed by the French resistance. Heinrich Himmler, the head of the SS and a key architect of the Holocaust, personally visited the division in April 1944. He explicitly urged them to employ the same brutal and indiscriminate tactics they had used against Soviet partisans, emphasizing the need to crush any resistance with extreme force. Disturbingly, rather than prioritizing the reinforcement of crucial German positions in Normandy in the face of the impending Allied invasion, Das Reich was specifically ordered to focus on suppressing resistance fighters and intimidating the civilian population. Their actions during this period were characterized by a horrifying pattern of public hangings, mass shootings of civilians, widespread looting of homes and businesses, and brutal collective reprisals against entire communities. Over 120 documented atrocities are attributed to the Das Reich division during this period in southwestern France, a chilling foreshadowing of the horror that would unfold in Tulle. However, the SS' brutal campaign of terror, while inflicting immense suffering, also had the unintended consequence of emboldening local resistance movements in some areas. The growing threat posed by the resistance, particularly in the Carise region where Tulle was located, was rapidly escalating and soon reached a breaking point. By early June 1944, the French resistance in Tulle, primarily composed of Maquis FTP, Franksterers et Partisans, a communist-leaning resistance group led by the determined Jacques Chaput, were preparing a bold operation. Their aim was to disrupt German defenses in the town and seize much-needed weapons and supplies for their continued fight against the occupation. On June 7, 1944, just one day after the Allied landings in Normandy, the resistance offensive in Tulle began. Their opening move was a daring bazooka strike against the barracks of the German 95th Security Regiment stationed in the town. This audacious attack signaled the start of a coordinated effort to liberate Tulle from German control. By mid-morning on June 7th, key strategic positions within Tulle had fallen into the hands of the resistance fighters. The town hall, the central post office, and the vital train station were all under their control. At the train station, the resistance encountered only a small detachment of 18 railway watchmen and one railway employee, Abel Leblanc. Though the watchmen declined to actively join the Maquis in their fight, they remained inside the station, perhaps hoping to protect the vital infrastructure. However, by early afternoon, German forces managed to temporarily retake the train station. In a tragic and brutal incident, the German troops, either mistaking or deliberately misidentifying the white armbands worn by the railway watchmen, intended to signify their non-combatant status, summarily executed all 18 watchmen and the station worker without any interrogation or investigation. Abel Leblanc was the sole survivor of this massacre, miraculously managing to escape moments before the killings began. Fighting resumed in Tulle the following day, June 8th, with the resistance targeting remaining German strongholds throughout the town. These included the girls' school in the northern part of Tulle, as well as the weapons factory and the Sulhack school located in the southern district. At the girls' school, the battle intensified significantly, eventually culminating in the building being set ablaze amidst a fierce exchange of gunfire. Around 5 p.m., amidst the chaos and confusion of the fighting, German soldiers attempting to evacuate the burning school were gunned down, some even reportedly killed by their own grenades in the desperate melee. Following the German surrender of the girls' school, the Maquis fighters identified and summarily executed 9 members of the SD, Sicherheitsdienst, the intelligence agency of the SS and the Nazi Party in Germany under Hitler's regime. By the evening of June 8th, after 2 days of intense fighting, the majority of the town of Tulle was firmly in the hands of the French resistance. German losses during these 2 days were estimated to be between 37 to 50 dead, with up to 60 missing, many of whom were likely executed after being captured by the resistance, and around 25 to 37 wounded. Resistance casualties were significantly lower, though precise figures remain difficult to ascertain. According to the self-published accounts of SS Sturmbannführer Otto Weidinger, a regimental commander within the 2nd SS Division Das Reich, many dozens of German soldiers were allegedly killed after their surrender to the resistance, and numerous cadavers bore evidence of mutilation. This account is corroborated by Heinz Schmidt, a doctor serving with the 3rd Battalion of the 2nd SS Division, Das Reich, the same battalion commanded by SS Sturmbannführer Helmut Kämpfe. On the same evening of June 8th, at approximately 9 p.m., the first tanks of the 2nd SS Panzer Division, Das Reich, began to arrive in Tulle from 3 different directions, catching the victorious resistance fighters completely off guard. The Maquis, who were primarily lightly armed and unprepared to face such a formidable and heavily armored force, immediately made the difficult decision to retreat to the relative safety of the surrounding hills without engaging in further direct combat within the town itself. The SS established their initial command post in the Sulhack district, near the strategically important weapons factory, later relocating to the Hotel Moderne, in the town's center the following day. Throughout the night of June 8th and into the early hours of June 9th, heavily armed SS patrols systematically secured the town, establishing a tight perimeter around it and effectively sealing off any escape routes for the civilian population. At dawn on June 9th, 1944, the 2nd SS Panzer Division Das Reich initiated a brutal and systematic reprisal against the civilian population of Tulle, holding them collectively responsible for the resistance actions of the preceding days. Under the false pretense of conducting routine identity checks, more than 3,000 men aged between 16 and 60 were forcibly apprehended, often dragged from their homes in the early morning hours, and assembled in Sulhack Square, directly facing the Tulle weapons factory, a grim symbol of the conflict. The terrified detainees were then divided into columns, and a brutal selection process began, overseen by SS officers, most notably Walter Schmald of the Gestapo, the notorious Nazi secret police. By late afternoon, 120 men had been arbitrarily marked for immediate execution. Following urgent and impassioned appeals from local authorities and prominent citizens, 21 individuals were eventually spared from this horrific fate, reducing the number of condemned men to 99. These 99 men, their hands tightly bound behind their backs, were then led in small groups of 10 to predetermined execution sites scattered throughout the town. Nooses had been prepared in advance, hanging ominously from balconies of buildings, lampposts lining the streets, and even sturdy trees, creating a macabre and terrifying scene that stretched across several hundred meters of the once peaceful town. The executions were carried out with chilling efficiency and a disturbing lack of remorse. Each victim was forced to climb a ladder positioned beneath the makeshift gallows. SS soldiers and coldly placed a noose around their neck before brutally kicking away the ladder, leaving condemned men to slowly strangle to death. In some particularly horrific instances, witnesses reported that the executioners hastened the death of their victims by pulling violently on their legs, striking them with rifle butts, or even shooting them with submachine guns or pistols as they hung suspended. Witnesses also recounted the horrifying sight of SS soldiers, in fits of cruel rage, violently shoving victims who hesitated or showed any sign of fear at the sight of the gallows. Throughout this unspeakable atrocity, SS officers and soldiers displayed a shocking and disturbing indifference to the immense suffering they were inflicting upon the innocent civilian population. They brazenly gathered at the Tulle Cafe, located directly opposite Sulhack Square, where they drank stolen wine, laughed, and listened to loud, jaunty music being played on a gramophone, all while the agonizing executions unfolded just a stone's throw away. Following the brutal hangings, the SS initially issued orders that the bodies of the victims were to be thrown into the Carise River without any form of burial, a final act of utter dehumanization. However, after intense and persistent negotiations led by courageous local officials, the German authorities eventually permitted the interment of the bodies. The condition was that they would be buried anonymously on the site of a municipal garbage dumping quail located just outside the city limits. The corpses were hastily and anonymously buried, with no identification permitted, leaving families in agonizing uncertainty for weeks and months to come. The brutal hangings of 99 innocent men on June 9, 1944, in Tulle were not the end of the reign of terror inflicted upon the town by the 2nd SS Panzer Division Das Reich. In the days and weeks that followed, the division intensified its campaign of terror against the local population through further mass arrests, deportations, and additional acts of unspeakable brutality. On June 10th, the remaining hostages who had been held at the Tulle weapons factory underwent a selection process chillingly similar to one that had preceded the hangings. SS officers, including the notorious Gestapo member Walter Schmald, in collaboration with local friend authorities who were likely acting under duress, divided the detainees into groups designated for either immediate deportation to concentration camps or eventual release. A total of 311 men and 660 young members of the Charniers de Jeunesse, a youth labor organization established by the Vichy regime, were forcibly transported from Tulle to the nearby town of Limoges. There, they underwent yet another round of brutal selection, in which members of the Milice, a paramilitary force aligned with the collaborationist Vichy government, played a crucial and reprehensible role. Following the second selection, 162 men and all members of the Charniers de Jeunesse were eventually freed. However, The remaining 149 prisoners were subsequently deported to the infamous Dachau concentration camp on July 2, 1944. Tragically, 101 of these men did not survive the horrific conditions of the camp and perished before the war's end. The SS reign of terror in Tulle did not end with the hangings and deportations. Between June 11th and July 31st, the laboratory of the Tulle weapons factory was repurposed into a makeshift torture center. The Millers, collaborating closely with the Gestapo's Walter Schmald, subjected numerous detainees to horrific and inhumane abuse in this makeshift torture chamber. On June 21st, 3 young militiamen, none older than 20, sadistically poured acid onto the facial wounds of a man they had just brutally beaten with a blackjack. Additionally, on the same day, another brutal raid resulted in the seizure of 80 more men, who were then sent for forced labor in Austria, further tearing apart families and communities. The German troops of the 2nd SS Panzer Division Das Reich finally withdrew from the Curies region on August 16, 1944, as the Allied liberation of France gained momentum. In total, the combined actions of the Wehrmacht, the Waffen-SS, and the SD claimed the lives of 218 innocent civilians in Tulle, a devastating toll for a relatively small town. The SS' brutal tactics, while inflicting immense suffering, did succeed in their immediate aim, to sow terror among the population and undermine support for French resistance in the region. In the aftermath of the Tulle massacre, several key figures involved in the atrocities faced varying degrees of justice, or in some cases, evaded it altogether. Walter Schmald, the Gestapo officer directly implicated in selecting the victims for execution, was captured by French resistance fighters on August 15, 1944, following the German retreat. Just a week later, on August 22nd, he was executed without trial by his captors, a swift and brutal form of retribution. Otto Weidinger, the final commander of the SS Regiment Der Führer, which played a significant role in the brutal reprisals in Tulle, was detained between 1947 and 1951 and subjected to interrogation regarding his involvement. Although he was prosecuted for his voluntary service in the Waffen-SS, an organization that was declared criminal at the Nuremberg trials, he was ultimately acquitted. After his release, Weidinger went on to author several books on the 2nd SS Panzer Division Das Reich, which have been widely viewed in France as revisionist accounts that downplay the division's atrocities. The most notorious figure connected to the Tulle massacre was General Heinz Lammerding, the overall commander of the 2nd SS Panzer Division, Das Reich. In 1951, a French military court sentenced Lammerding to death in absentia for his direct role in ordering the massacre. However, he lived freely and openly in West Germany for the remainder of his life. Multiple attempts by the French government to bring Lammerding to justice through extradition requests consistently failed. He died of cancer in 1971 at the age of 66, having never faced any legal punishment for his command responsibility in the horrific atrocities committed at Tulle. The SS officer who met perhaps the most horrific and consequential fate following the events in Tulle was SS Sturmbannführer Helmut Kämpfe, the commander of the 3rd Battalion of the 2nd SS Panzer Division, Das Reich. Kämpfe was captured on June 9, 1944, the very day of the hangings in Tulle, by a group of French resistance fighters led by Sergeant Jean Canu from Colonel Georges Guingouin's brigade, a significant part of the Maquis du Limousin, one of the largest and most active French resistance groups. Canu handed the captured SS officer over to Colonel Georges Guingouin, who, in direct retaliation for the Tulle massacre, ordered Kämpfe's execution the following day. While the exact circumstances remain unclear and are shrouded in conflicting accounts, according to one French informant, the 34-year-old Helmut Kämpfe and several captured Wehrmacht soldiers were burned alive inside a captured German military ambulance in front of a crowd of resistance fighters and local civilians. When the Das Reich division discovered that Kämpfe, a respected and well-liked officer, had been kidnapped by the resistance, SS Sturmbannführer Adolf Diekmann, the commander of the 1st Battalion of the 2nd SS Panzer Division, Das Reich, and a personal friend of Kämpfe, led his troops on a brutal and vengeful search of the surrounding area. During this frantic search, 2 innocent local men were shot dead by SS men under Diekmann's command. Eventually, Diekmann's unit reached the outskirts of the village of Oradour-sur-Glane,